And without further ado, Ileana Paul and Holly Scott will be presenting Clausal Complementation in Malagasy.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks to the organizers for making this happen. Holly isn't here today, but I'll be presenting on her behalf. So this paper is looking at causal complementation, and it is sort of preliminary research, but I hope it's going to lead to some more fruitful outcomes. So the background is that there is research on causal complementation that suggests that there's a hierarchical correspondence between the semantics of the selecting verb and the syntax of the embedded clause. And Malagasy is interesting in this perspective, at least at first glance, because it lacks a morphological distinction between tensed and tenseless clauses. So there are things that look like full CPs headed by the complementizer fa, but it's also been recognized that there are complement clauses that are smaller than CP in the literature on Malagasy, and I'll come back to these citations shortly. The proposal that we put forward in this paper is that we can find evidence for 3 types of clausal complements to a lexical verb. Propositional complements as in 1a. So here we have manantena isu fai verifiara. So the complement to manantena is a proposition. And then there are situation complements like in 1b, manda ira isu. And then what we're calling event complements in 1c. So mankahala mamaki buki ni pianatra. And there are also what would be functional restructuring with predicates like te, want in 1D. We're not going to talk about those in this talk. However, we're going to focus on the examples such as in 1A, B, and C. So the outline of the talk is as follows. This is annoying. So we'll start with a background on Malagasy clause structure, and then I'll introduce the implicational complementation hierarchy that this work is based on. And then I'll go into the diagnostics for clause size that are specific to Malagasy. I'll sketch an analysis and then conclude. So Malagasy is normally described as a VOS language spoken in Madagascar. So we have an example here in 2. So the subject here is at the right edge of the clause. And it's not really important for this talk, but I'm going to assume that you get VOS word order by fronting of some kind of projection, say TP, to position where it precedes and commands the subject. As in work by Pearson and others. But what is important to this talk is the fact that there are no dedicated infinitives. So all verbs are marked with some kind of tense marking, which is 0 in present and in past and H in future. And the second thing that's important is that CP complements extrapose, and in fact this extraposition is obligatory if the embedded subject is overt, as in for. So resua here is the embedded subject and it's overt, so extraposition in this case is obligatory. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there has been previous work, actually I'll leave this here like this, sorry, on different types of clausal complements in Malagasy. So I'll mention a couple here, one work by Matt Pearson on perception verb complements, and I'm not going to be talking about these in this talk, but what's important is that he argues that this is a clause here, that's a complement to the perception verb, and that it's smaller than a regular full clause that we might have up here. And the fact that it's small, it's lacking this position that of TP fronting, so we get SVO word order. And then another body of research within Malagasy, the complement clause research is about control, as in 6A and B. And Polinsky and Potsdam, for example, argue that the complement to the control verb is smaller than a full CP. So we have already evidence in the literature for complements that are smaller than CP. Okay, so let's now look at the ish. So the implicational complementation hierarchy, proposed by some Germans, that's why it's ish. So the idea is that complement clauses are not selected per se, or only in a very limited way. And the only restriction really is that the combination of the matrix predicate and the complement clause has to be interpretable. And the motivation for this approach is that the matrix predicate and the embedded clause can affect each other in different ways. So we don't want to have a pure selection approach. I'm not really going to defend this. People can go and read this paper if they want to know more. But one of the things that they propose is in this hierarchy, we have complement clauses of different sizes and also different levels of independence. So we have propositions, which are larger and more independent than situations, which are larger and more independent than event complements. So propositions, roughly, these are things that can be assigned a truth value. Situations are eventualities that are temporarily anchored to the matrix clause and are typically realized as irrealis. And then event complements are things that are events that are interpreted as simultaneous in time with the matrix. And they are often realized cross-linguistically as infinitival or tenseless. I've given you some example verbs in English here. So the idea is to explore this hierarchy in Malagasy. And so this builds on work that Holly Scott did while an undergrad at Western. So what I'll be exploring in this section therefore are the diagnostics for different types of clausal structure in Malagasy. And the first one has to do with the presence of the complementizer. So the complementizer fa can appear with proposition complements as in 8 and 9. And it's either blocked with verbs that take situation complements like manda. It's ungrammatical to have fa, the complementizer here, or with mankahala, it's ungrammatical to have fa. Or with certain verbs, we get a change in meaning. So this is much like English. So if we have a verb like forget, if it appears without fa, then we get the implicative meaning. So Rasua forgot to buy bananas means Rasua did not buy bananas. If we use fa, we get the factive reading. So Rasua forgot that she bought bananas means that she did buy bananas, she just forgot about it. Okay, so it's not a pure case of fa not being possible, it's just when it's there, we get this shift all of a sudden to the proposition interpretation of the complement clause. And so just very simply, we take these facts to show that situation and event complements are smaller than CP because you can't have the complementizer. Now, unfortunately, things aren't quite that simple because there is another complementizer, mba, in Malagasy, which shows up sometimes with situation and event complements. We leave this for future research. And moreover, a lot of the time, you can actually get a determiner here in the complement clause. So it looks like it's kind of a nominalized clause. Again, we set this aside for future research to see how it can be integrated into this picture that we're looking at. Okay, so that's the first diagnostic. It separates proposition verbs from situation and event verbs. The second diagnostic is tense. So proposition complements have free tense, so the embedded verb can have any tense. So Kutu says that he will, or is eating, or ate liver. Situation complements, on the other hand, are marked with future tense. So manda yinana, so we need to use the H future marker here. Manda yinana atimkena ikutu. And event complements must match in tense. So we see here in 17, so mankaala is in the present tense, and so we need to use mamaki in the present tense. So those are the event complements. So we get anaphoric tense for event complements and dependent tense for situation. So here we have a three-way split between the different types of complements. And then the third diagnostic is partial control. So what is partial control? That's a situation when the controllee must include the controller, but it doesn't have to be identical with it. So there could be other people, for example. So, and we can see the partial control turns up with the complements of some verbs, but not all. So manage, for example, does not allow partial control. The chair managed to gather at 8 is ungrammatical because gather needs a plural subject and the chair is singular. But in C, the chair preferred to gather. At 6, this is fine. And so this is the partial control. So the people gathering is the chair plus other people. And cross-linguistically, partial control, as in with prefer, is possible with proposition and situation complements, whereas event complements require exhaustive control, like manage here. So looking at Malagasy now, so we have this miara, which means together, and it forms a complex predicate that requires a plural subject. So we can see sort of the baseline facts in 19A and B. So 19A, the students work together. That's fine because students can be plural, but sua works together is not possible. And so now we can try this with our different types of matrix predicates, and we see that partial control is possible with proposition and situation complements. So Rasua hopes to work together, or Sua refuses to work together, but it's not possible with event complements. So Mangala, Miara, Miasa, Isu, Sua hates to work together is ungrammatical. So exhaustive control is required with the event complements. Okay, now the last diagnostic is the distribution of adverbs. So adverbs can appear in between the matrix predicate and the complement clause with situation type complements. So manda matetika ira isu, so Sua often refuses to sing. But with event complements, we can't have the adverb in this position in between the matrix predicate and the complement clause. It has to appear after the complement clause. Mankala mamaki buki fuana ni pianacha. Okay, so then summarizing what we've seen, so we have the different diagnostics, the complementizer, tense, partial control, the position of the adverb, and then a diagnostic that I'm not going to talk about in this talk, but I just mention it here is extraposition. So whether or not the complement clause can extrapose. So we see that we have a difference between these three types of complements. And then the fourth, as I said, is te, want, which is a functional predicate, and it acts differently as well. In fact, it looks a lot like event type complements, but it itself is just a functional predicate. It's not a lexical predicate. But again, we have to leave that for future research. And so just to say what some of the verbs are that we've looked at in the different classes. So for proposition complements for proposition complement taking verbs, we have things like milaza, minu, manantena, manadinu, so say, believe, hope, forget. Situation, manda, refuse, mikasa, intend, and so forth. And then event, mankahala, hate, manadinu, forget, the implicative version, manandrana, and so forth. So just to give you an idea of some of the predicates that we looked at. So we can see these three classes of complement clauses. And now what we'd like to do is propose an analysis, structural analysis. And this is where the work is at sort of the beginning stages. Let's see what's going on here. So the idea is proposition complements, not surprisingly, they're just full CPs. We can see an overt complementizer. Fa is possible with these complements. They have independent tense, so no restrictions there. And we can have a pro subject in this embedded clause, and pro allows for partial control following Landau. And then the fourth property, the fact that they can scramble past adverbs, I don't really have an analysis of why this is, but it does seem to be linked to the fact that CPs are fairly mobile in the language. Situation complements are slightly smaller, so they lack they're a TP, say, lacking the CP layer, so we don't get an overt complementizer contrary to the proposition ones, setting aside ba for the moment. And the T head in this context is not completely independent. It is, as we saw, it has to be realized as irrealis. And this, in fact, is common cross-linguistically for situation complements. There is a position for pro in this structure because we have a full TP. Therefore, we get the possibility of partial control. And it seems to be something that is mobile that can scramble past adverbs. And then the third type of complement, the smallest one, are the event ones, which we propose are voice P complements. So they're even smaller than TP. Again, this means there's no C projection there, no fa. They lack a TP layer. And so what happens in this case is that the time of the embedded event, given there's no TP there, it has to be interpreted as simultaneous with the time of the matrix event. So you get matching tense. And we can see effects of like this even in English, where we have an infinitival. So Sandy tried to eat liver tomorrow is not possible. So the time of the embedded event has to be simultaneous. The time of the eating has to be simultaneous with the time of the trying. And then because they're so small, they lack a position for pro. Therefore, you're going to get exhaustive control. I'm going to come back to this just on the next page. And again, I don't really have an analysis of why this is, but it seems to be that they cannot scramble. And again, I'm going to talk about this shortly. Okay, so again, so this is the, we've diagnosed these three classes, and the goal is to tie the three classes to different syntactic sizes. So CP, TP, and voice P. So obviously the devil is in the details, and that's the next stage of the project. But I just want to talk a little bit more about event complements in the remaining time. So in particular, how do we get the restriction to exhaustive control? So the idea that I'd like to pursue here is that this voice P complement that's down here. So this is the complement clause. It's the voice P. It itself is defective and it lacks agent 5 features. So it has to get those 5 features valued from the matrix voice head. So the matrix voice head, it has 5 features from the DP merged in its specifier, and it passes them down to the embedded voice head. And because of this identity in 5 features, we get exhaustive control. You don't have a pro here, you just have pure identity of 5 features. So that it would get the exhaustive control reading and distinguish event complements from the other two. However, there's a wrinkle here in the sense that this voice head is not completely defective. It seems to only be defective for 5 features because the voice features appear to be free. So let's look at some of the data here. So if the voice features were unvalued here, then we'd expect just matching. We'd have to like take the voice features of the matrix verb and pass them down to the embedded verb, but that's not the case. So I've given you some examples here in 24. So here we have the matrix verb is actor topic, but the embedded predicate is circumstantial topic. So this soap needs to be used to wash clothes, is roughly the translation here. Or we can have theme topic as in 24b, Mila sasan rasu ilai zaza, the child needs to be washed by rasua. Or as in 24c with nanumbuka. So we have different embedded voice possibilities here. Now, you might look at these sentences in 24 and say, well, this looks like raising. It doesn't look like control at all. That if you have raising, you're going to get exhaustive control for free. But I looked around and there are other verbs in the event class that are not raising, or at least I don't think they're raising. So these would be things like hate. So this is 25. And so these are the data that I was pestering Luna about this week. And so I think she was, her comment about these sentences are like, they're grammatical, but there's something weird about them. So I included them, but more work needs to be done here to understand what exactly is going on with the hesitation about these sentences. So But they contrast in the ways that are mysterious to be with try. So try really doesn't allow the embedded verb to have a different voice. And then the lack of object shift, I'll just leave it here because I'm running out of time. But the idea is to link that to what's been observed before, that indefinite objects don't undergo object shift in Malagasy. So maybe there's something about event style complements. They're like indefinite objects. They can't shift. OK, so Malagasy provides evidence in favor of the implicational complementation hierarchy. There seem to be these three classes, despite the lacking morphological cues for finiteness. And moreover, there is a distinct class of functional predicates like te. And so this shows that these effects are independent of the lexical functional distinction. And event complements pattern mainly with functional restructuring, but there are differences. And there are obviously lots of things that need to be worked on. So the status of these other, the complementizer mba and the ni, determiner, the voice dependencies, which I still really haven't done enough work on, and then the properties of functional restructuring with te. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for questions. Again, feel free to raise your hand or to put something in the chat. Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks, Ileana, for a great talk. I know that you explicitly set aside perception verb complements, which is fair, but I am curious as to where you might pigeonhole them. If my an analysis of them is on the right track, and maybe there are some mistakes in my analysis, but it looks like I would. They seem to have a mixture of the kinds of properties that you associate with situation complements and the ones that you associate with event complements. So they have the tense matching that we get with event complements. They don't scramble, I think. Well, they might scramble. That's trickier. But there were some tests that I had that suggested that they were larger than voice P, maybe about the size of TP. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about where they might get situated in this typology.
Well, the typology was not designed to include perception verb complements explicitly. Like not my, but like the Ishar, like when they talk about these things, they set them aside. But I mean, the big difference is that there's an overt subject in your perception verb complements.
Right.
Right, or trigger,
right.
Whatever you want to call it, and there is not one in these. So there has. I don't know what that.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know why, but that would be one big difference between them.
I characterize them semantically as events, but maybe that's not correct, or maybe there needs to be an intermediate category semantically between situations and events that we could add to this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's an interesting puzzle.
Yeah, it is. It is. So that would be something to do for sure, is better understand the differences. Yeah. Thanks.
Anderson, go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. I just had a sort of maybe it's like a curiosity about the voice matching data. I think with try, and I just had I was wondering to what extent this is something that you find with other verbs as well, and if so, I wonder if you've considered the possibility of like maybe splitting apart kind of the thing that spells out the voice and the thing that gives you the control back. Because right now, I guess you have them on the same head.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion, actually. So the fact of the matter is I haven't thought that much about this yet. So I hadn't even considered that, but that would be one way to go. And that would be helpful. Because, and in fact, even like if you even just pay the little bit attention to that tree I gave, I think it's really problematic. Because as soon as you have a non-active voice on the embedded clause, you can get an agent down there. And that agent is not the same as the matrix agent because the matrix verb is actor topic. So there's all sorts of issues that come up as soon as you start looking at voice that make just simply saying, oh, it's voice P and we just copy P. That's just not going to work. So it was like my first, I was like, oh, we can do exhaustive control this way. And then I realized, oh, there's lots of other problems here. But that's an interesting idea to separate the voice from the voice. And that makes sense because Austronesian voice is kind of different than the voice that this system was designed to handle.
I guess I'm wondering if you have also thoughts about what implications that has for like the proposal from Brandon Bollinger.
Well, I think for them, all that matters is that you get these different sizes, right? And then the exact nature of in your language of how, what structures realize those different sizes, they don't really care, right? So I think for them, it's not really an issue. Yeah.
We have time for one more question, perhaps. Signal yourself in any way.
Eric, I'm sure Eric has a question.
Where's Eric?
Can you hear me? You want me to ask a question?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
All right. First of all, my pronouns are easy, Azi, and ni.
Okay, good.
So my question is just a prediction about how this might interact with negation on the complement. If your third category is so small, do you predict that you might not get negation on those?
So I did look at negation, and I think I determined that it didn't help me, which makes me think it can appear on the smallest ones. But I don't remember now. But the fact that it's not here makes me think that I gave up on negation.
Yeah. So then the category of that event complement has to be big enough to have negation in it, wherever that is.
Yeah. Which, yeah. Yes. Which I know who has anyone worked on negation in Malagasy? Like, where is that?
I have not, but I am increasingly becoming suspicious that Malagasy might have a high negation and a low negation because of, I tried to look at this with perception verb complements and I basically got nowhere, but there were a few pieces of data that suggested that you could have a kind of low, like voice P focus negation as well as the high negation that we're all familiar with. So I think it's something that really needs to be investigated.
Yeah, I think the thing to do would be do one with an MPI, like veli or something, because then you get away from the possibility of just like constituent negation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great.
Oh,
All right, I like that strategy of calling on your question askers. We should use that more often. Let's thank our speakers. And Connie,